Okay.
Okay. So, a very good afternoon to one and all present here. Today, I, Rahul Dandotia, Assistant Professor of Law, on behalf of Center for Legal Studies, Geeta Ratan International Business School, welcome our esteemed guest, Dr. Sophy K. Joseph, and all the attendees on today's webinar on food security in India. Geeta Ratan International Business School, GIBS, was established in the year 2004. GIBS is affiliated to Guru Gobind Singh Indraprath University, Delhi, and is approved by All India Council for Technical Education, AICTCE, Ministry of HRD, Government of India for Technical Courses, and Bar Council of India, BCI, for law courses. GIBS is currently offering postgraduate course of MBA, first and second shift, MBA, International Business, MCA, Integrated, and undergraduate courses of BBA, BBA LLB, and BA LLB. GIBS has been graded A by National Assessment and Accreditation Council in the second cycle. GIBS has been rated A plus by State Fee Regulatory Committee, a fee committee of Government of and City of Delhi, and GGSIP University. CLS GIBS has been rated the highest grading A by Joint Inspection Committee of Government of and City of Delhi and GGSIP University. GIBS has been graded A by the audit cell of GGSIP University consecutively from past 8 years. Also, GIBS has been rated as number 2 Pan-Indian by Times Business Schools survey consecutively for the year 2018 and 2019. Now, the guest speaker of our webinar today is Dr. Sophy K. Joseph, ma'am. She is associated with the National University, Delhi since 2013. She was postdoctoral fellow in the project Law of Social Reproduction, sponsored by European Research Council, anchored by King's College of London. She focused her research on paid domestic work. Her subject of teaching are labor and development and legal history at the university. In her doctoral study, she studied farmers' right in neoliberal India, wherein she analyzed impact of legal policy reforms during Second Green Revolution phase on farmers, customary rights, and livelihood, particularly in the context of the extension of private property rights to plant varieties and seeds and migration of cultivators to the cities. She is engaged with many policy initiatives with the international organizations, state governments, law commissions, and civil society organizations. Her policy work includes assistance in drafting of labor policies, bill on domestic workers, rulemaking for bonded laborers, drafting policy for the protection of early childhood care and development, uniform legislation for informal sector, etc. We are honored to have you, ma'am. I request you to kindly commence the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the very warm introduction.
Yes.
Very good afternoon, everyone. So, as he mentioned, the title of the presentation today is Law Relating to Food Security in India, a Critical Appraisal. I hope I am audible. I'm clear.
Yes, madam, you are loud and clear.
Okay. So today our talk is going to be around law relating to food security in India, and how the definition of food security is understood widely, both in international and Indian in the domestic space. I think firstly, when we talk about food security, it becomes important to analyze how it is being defined internationally. And that's where we look at the definition of food security by the United Nations Committee on World Food Security in 1996. So according to World Food Security 1996, food security means that all people at all times have physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets their food preferences and dietary needs for an active and healthy life. for the all times. So basically, when you look at this definition, this is a very holistic definition. And this definition being borrowed by multiple world organizations like World Health Organization and Food and Agriculture Organization. So this is a very consensus definition adopted by many world forums which look at the issue of food security. And let's go a little deep into this definition. So when you try to analyze this definition, you find out at least important 4 pointers deriving from it. One, it talks about food availability. So it basically says that the food availability of, it shouldn't be just quantity wise, the availability of sufficient quantities of food of appropriate quality should be ensured to the consumers. And this adequate quantity of food with adequate quality needs to be supplied through domestic production or imports. So food availability is one of the important elements that flows from the definition of food security. And second is accessibility, food access. Access by individuals to adequate resources or entitlements for acquiring appropriate foods for a nutritious diet is very important. And how do you understand entitlements is a question. Entitlements are generally defined as a set of all commodity bundles over which a person can establish command given the legal, political, economic, and social arrangements of the community in which they live. It includes traditional rights such as access to common resources as well. So our first point was food availability. Second point was food access or accessibility. The third point is about utilization. So the food, the available food should be adequate to our diet. It should be clean, in the sense the food that is available should be clean, and it has to be at the adequate. Hello. Okay. So there has to be adequate physical features that makes sure that this food is utilized well by the consumers. So, and also the physiological needs of the consumers are met. So this brings out the importance of non-food inputs in food security. So it's not only the food, the other elements around food also should be adequately met. And lastly, it's about stability. So when the fourth feature that flows from the definition is about stability. So to be food secure, a population, household, or individual must have access to adequate food at all times. They should not be at the risk of losing their access to food as a consequence of any sudden shock. So when I say sudden shock, it means any economic or climatic crisis. So the concept of stability can therefore refer to both availability and access dimensions of food security. So once there is accessibility and availability to food for all times to come, then stability is automatically ensured. So these 4 pointers: food availability, food accessibility, utilization of food, making the food probable of utilization to the consumers. That's the third point. Lastly, stability. These 4 points are very integral to the definition of food security that we mentioned earlier. So in a wider context, or in a general context, we can state that the 3 A's, capital A's, that is important, or which are primary concerns relating to food security in the world, is about availability, accessibility, and affordability of food. So accessibility, availability, and affordability becomes 3 primary concerns relating to food security. Now, I think it's also important to understand how is this policy concepts relating to food security has originated at the international level. It's very obvious that it is Food and Agriculture Organization which was established in 1945, they took up it's a specialized agency to fight against hunger. So FIO has put in a lot of specific efforts to arrest and prevent hunger and starvation across the world. And their objective is to achieve food security for all and make sure that people have regular access to enough high quality food to lead active and healthy lives. So when we look at this concept of food security, it was kind of originated in the policy documents in 1970s. In 1974, there was a World Food Conference, and it was in 1974 World Food Conference that there was an attempt to define food security. But in 1974, the definition of food security was just limited to concentrating more on food supply or food distribution. It was just about assuring the availability and price stability of basic foodstuffs at the international and national level. However, when we reach 1983, we see a sea change in defining food security. It started concentrating more on food production as well. It was not only talking about food distribution or food security. It was also talking about food production. So in 1983, FIO analyzed, focused on food access, leading to a definition based on the balance between the demand and supply side of the food security equation. So it was basically stating that it's the responsibility of FIO, Food and Agriculture Organization, to ensure that all people at all times have both physical and economic access to the basic food that they need. The definition was revised to include the individual and household level, in addition to the regional and national level aggregation in food security analysis. Later in 1986, we see a further enlargement of the perspective in relation to food security. When I say enlarging the scope of food security, I specifically hint at the inclusion of or understanding of temporal dynamics around food security. It was in World Bank report on poverty and hunger in 1986 introduced the distinction between chronic food insecurity associated with problems of continuing or structural poverty and low incomes, and transitory food insecurity, which involved periods of intensified pressure caused by natural disasters, economic collapse, or conflict. So basically, it is not just making the food available for the people. The structure should also ensure that other structural patterns or other structural injustices don't result in deterring the access of the public towards food. This was complemented by Amartya Sen's theory of famine, which came out in 1981, that highlighted the effect of personal entitlements on food access. Personal entitlements can be production, labor, trade, and transfer-based resources. The widely accepted World Food Summit 1996 also tried to reinforce this multi-dimensional nature of food security and included food access, availability, food use, and stability into their agenda to promote food security. It has enabled policy responses focused on the promotion and recovery of livelihood options. Initially, if you read Chambers and Convoy's literature that came out in 1992, they sort of stressed on livelihood approach to ensure food security for the people internationally. They have increasingly applied emergency context, livelihood approach in emergency context, and talked about looking at vulnerability, risk coping, and risk management to understand or ensure food security. So when you try to understand food security, you need to also take into consideration the multidimensional factors about what constitutes starvation and what are the structural patterns that's prevalent in the society that puts a population into risk of poverty all the time. So is there a pattern of or stable pattern of poverty that is visible in the society? So when we talk about food security, it has to be really inclusive. It has to take into consideration other temporal factors that exist in the society. That's why we say that food security is also a matter or also an issue which is intrinsically related with ethical and human rights dimension. We all know that right to food is not a new concept. In fact, if you look at the origin of the concept legally, in legal language, it's been included in the UN Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. In 1996, the formal adoption of right to adequate food marked a milestone achievement by World Food Summit delegates, which I earlier mentioned. So, in a way, the rights-based approach to food security is there. It existed in the legal documents from 1948. Currently, if we look at the data, it's over 40 countries which have right to food enshrined in their constitution. And FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization, estimates that right to food could be judicial in some 54 countries. So there are more and more countries taking up right-based approach to food security internationally. When we come to the issue of food security, or why this issue is very important to look at, especially when we look at the data, it says that about 850 million people in the world are undernourished. It's a number that has hardly changed from 1990 to 1992 base period for the World Food Summit and the Millennium Development Goals commitments on reducing hunger by 2015. So this 1992 base figure, that is about 850 million people are undernourished, that is stably that's stable for even now. When we look at hunger hotspots, it's basically there is a protracted crisis in countries in Africa and South Asia. Roughly, the figures are 25 countries in Africa, 11 countries in Asia, 2 countries in Latin America, 1 country in Europe. They're all hotspots, hunger hotspots. The policy approach, largely from international forum, especially Food and Agriculture Organization, had been a twin track approach. So basically, it says that you have to combine sustainable agricultural and rural development mode, but in order to ensure distribution of food, accessibility to food for the most needy. So when they talk about twin track approach, the first track is to ensure that there is sustainable production of food, there is sustainable agriculture production, and track 2 is about devising the options to provide support to the vulnerable groups, provide access to vulnerable groups at the food front. In the sense, the food grains should be available to vulnerable groups through distributive mechanism. So it's a twin track approach that has been adopted by Food and Agriculture Organization, and it has always advised the hunger hotspot countries to follow this mechanism. The production and the distribution has to go hand in hand. It cannot be disconnected from each other. And so we have sort of tried to understand what is the definition of food security internationally, and how Food and Agriculture Organization try to analyze the definition, and what are the important primary concerns relating to food security. And we have also looked at what is the solution that has been suggested by Food and Agriculture Organization through twin track approach. Now it is important to look at what is the paradigm of right to food debate in India. So that's where we look at both reality relating to food security in India, and also the law, the solution, how the law tried to solve the issue of food insecurity in India. If you look at the reality, India has ranked 94 among 107 nations in the Global Hunger Index in 2020. So we are in a serious hunger category. Experts blame poor implementation processes, lack of effective monitoring, and siloed approach in tackling malnutrition, and poor performance by large states behind the low ranking. So there are multi reasons that has been pointed out by the experts for this low ranking. If you look at last year, 2019, so this is 2020 index. Last year in 2019, we were ranked 102 out of 117 countries. The neighboring countries like Bangladesh, Myanmar, Pakistan, they are also in the serious category, but ranked higher than India in year's 2020's hunger index. While Bangladesh ranked 75, Myanmar and Pakistan are in the 78th and 88th position. So they are higher in ranking than compared to India. Now, when we look at how was that our law has tried to tackle right to food in rights-based perspective. So what is the rights-based approach in India towards right to food? Under the constitutional safeguards, the plain reading of the Constitution ensures right to food as a fundamental right to realize right to life and personal liberty. That comes under Article 21. The right to food is inherent to a life with dignity, and Article 21 of the Constitution guarantees a fundamental right to life and personal liberty. It has to be read. This has to be read along with Article 39A and 47 to understand the nature of the obligations of the state in order to ensure effective realization of this right to food. When you look at Article 39A of the Constitution, it actually requires, the Article 39A requires the states to direct its policies towards securing that all its citizens have the right to an adequate means of livelihood. And if you look at Article 47, it states, it mentions that the state has the duty to raise the level of nutrition and standard of living of its people as a primary responsibility. So Article 39A and Article 47 need to be read together with Article 21 in order to ensure or in order to understand right to food as a non-conditional right. So the Constitution makes the right to food as a guaranteed fundamental right, which is enforceable by virtues of the constitutional remedy provided under Article 32 of the Constitution. I think it's that at this juncture, I would like to take your attention to the judicial response to right to food debate in India. So as I mentioned, our Constitution gives us enough room to ensure food security or right to food as a fundamental right. When a case was filed by PUCL in Supreme Court in 2001, so it submitted a writ petition to the Supreme Court of India, asking three major questions. It's very important to listen to which were these important questions before the court. The first question was relating to starvation death. So it is basically asking the court, why is it that there are a lot of starvation deaths in India? Why is the starvation death becoming a national phenomenon? Why there is enough surplus stock of food grains in government godowns? Does the right to life mean that people who are starving and who are too poor to buy food grains should be provided food by the state free of cost? And while the surplus stock is lying unused, underutilized in the state godowns, the people of India, the citizens of the country, is dying out of starvation. Isn't this a fallacy of the constitutional right? So that was the first question raised before the Supreme Court. The second question was, doesn't the right to life under Article 21 of the Constitution of India include right to food? A very straightforward question. Third question was, doesn't the right to food, which has been upheld by the Apex Court, imply that the state has a duty to provide food, especially in situations of drought, to people who are drought affected and are not in a position to purchase food? So these three relevant questions, one was relating to starvation death and underutilized food stock in the state godowns. Second was a straight question as to enunciate right to food under the constitutional principles. Third question was relating to state's obligation to ensure right to food in affected areas to the affected population. So after this case came in before the Supreme Court in 2001, the Supreme Court had been giving continuous mandamus in the form of orders from 23rd July 2001 to the latest being 10th February 2017. And it's very interesting to read through the orders of the courts, orders of the Supreme Court, because it is on multiple level. It talks about, the orders talk about making entitlement schemes or available entitlements, legal entitlements. And it also deals with infrastructural issues and distribution. And it also talk about strengthening the available schemes developed by the central government and the state governments respectively. So the Supreme Court explicitly established a constitutional human right to food and determined a basic nutritional floor for India's impoverished millions. Over the last 10 years of this open and ongoing petition, the Supreme Court has not only reconfigured specific government food schemes into legal entitlements, setting out in detail minimum allocation of food grains and supplemental nutrients for India's poor, but has also clearly articulated how these government schemes are to be implemented and identified which public officials to hold accountable in the event of non-compliance. So Supreme Court came out very strongly in this petition in different years to ensure that the executive function, the public officials function, they have accountability towards distribution of food. The latest manifestation of government action on the right to food is the National Food Security Act that was passed in 2013. So in a way, one of the stronger outcome of this litigation, the PCL versus Union of India litigation, was the National Food Security Act 2013. The PUC petition sought enforcement of constitutional right to food under Article 21 of the Constitution of India. Actually, this paved this remedy in the sense. The PUC petition very explicitly sought enforcement of right to food through a statute, and this is what actually resulted in NFSA, National Food Security Act 2013. To date, the litigation remains open, standing as one of the longest running mandamus case of its kind. While early interim orders in the litigation addressed mainly issues relating to public distribution of food grains to families and persons falling below the government designated poverty line, the Supreme Court order, the recent Supreme Court order, they also kind of talking about identifying the food schemes which are already in existence and making it legal entitlements under the constitutional right to food. Important developments to government schemes in recent years have included preservation of the public distribution system through which grains are delivered to people of extreme poverty. Then the universalization of integrated child development scheme, which allows all children to have access to ICDS feeding centers. And then we have, it also talks about the mandated continuation of midday meal system, midday meal schemes in schools. And the court orders also talk about it talks about prohibiting any modification or discontinuation of these schemes, ICDS, PDS, midday meals, without the previous permission, without prior permission of the Supreme Court. So the court orders had been quite strong in a way. It sort of prevents the state government and the central government to discontinue any of these welfare schemes without the approval of the Supreme Court. This remarkable case, actually, through this case, the Supreme Court made the state government responsible for the implementation and monitoring of protected food schemes. PUC case is very notable both legally and politically, but most importantly, it is remarkable for the tangible and ever-growing positive effects that it has had on the lives of the poor and the hungry. The Supreme Court's ruling that the right to food is justiciable, reviewable, expandable, legally enforceable, constitutional, and thus inviolable, that opened up new avenues both for political discourse and for concrete action. Justiciability provides a vehicle for ordinary people to access and utilize the courts. So basically, when there is a damage to citizens' rights, they can directly go to the court under the jurisdiction, under the provisions relating to jurisdiction. So here, when right to food became a fundamental right, constitutional right, unconditional right, the public also had access to go to the court to get their damages remedied. So this case is a very important case in the internationally, entire world talk about the right to food case in India in the food security jurisprudence. So it has actually provided a very free hold for preserving and expanding existing right to food programs and for developing new programs to fight hunger, malnutrition, discrimination, and poverty. Yeah, so as I said, the judicial response was so strong that it led to a lot of political debates in relation to addressing food security through appropriate policies. And it's this judicial intervention that also resulted in drafting of the National Food Security Act 2013. But I should also mention that the implementation of the act was delayed so much that the implementation actually started happening from 2015 onwards. So there was a procrastination, or there was a delay in implementation of this enactment. I'll just briefly explain what is it about. What does National Food Security Act contain? That is just to understand how is right to food being ensured through the statute, and what is that? How is this food security being ensured or guaranteed through statutory mechanisms? As I mentioned, the objective of this act is to provide food and nutritional security in human life cycle approach by ensuring access to adequate quantity of quality food at affordable prices to people to live a very healthy and dignified life. So it's a very multifaceted approach. It says it's not only its aim is not only to ensure food and nutritional security to people. They believe in ensuring nutritional and food security for all the times to come. That means throughout the life cycle of a citizen. And it says it has to be available, accessible to the citizens at affordable prices. And this actually lays the foundation for the citizen of the country to live with a dignified life. And when we look at important provisions under the National Food Security Act, there are many provisions, but I will shortly talk about few provisions. One, as I mentioned, the important the approach of the act is towards converting welfare benefits to legal entitlements. So it says that right to food is legal entitlement. So the statute presents right to food as a legal entitlement throughout the statutory language. And then there's an increase in coverage of the targeted public distribution system. If you read Section 3, Subclause 2 of the National Food Security Act, it says that 75% of the rural population and 50% of the urban population should be covered under the NFSA. This is a major shift from the pre-NFSA coverage of TPDS, Targeted Public Distribution System, which is limited to households living below the poverty line. So when you look at the NFSA, National Food Security Act, it actually enlarges scope of coverage. Secondly, it talks about uniform entitlement of 5 kg of food grains per person. So again, if you read Section 3, Subclause 1 of NFSA, every person belonging to a priority household is entitled to receive 5 kg of rice per person per month from targeted public distribution system. So every person belonging to a priority household entitled to 5 kg per person. So that's again very welcoming provision. The third important feature would be reduction in prices of food grains. In the pre-NFSA period, the central government set the central issue prices for subsidized food grains distributed through TPDS. The prices were rupees 6, rupees 5, and rupees 3 for rice, wheat, and coarse grains respectively. But after NFSA, according to if you look at Schedule 1 of NFSA, It says that all eligible households shall be entitled to food grains at subsidized prices not exceeding rupees 3, rupees 2, and rupees 1 for for rice, wheat, and coarse grains respectively. So rupees 3 for rice, rupees 2 for wheat, and rupees 1 for coarse grains. So it's a drastic reduction in price of food grains compared to what was there in pre-NFSA period. And the Act is, NFSA is very, National Food Security Act is very specific about identification of eligible households by the state government. So when you look at section 10, 1A and 1B of the NFSA, it says state governments are they are required to identify households to be covered by NFSA and place the list of identified eligible households in the public domain. So, this exclusion, inclusion errors need to be dealt with administratively by the state governments. We all know that there were a lot of errors while this BPL categorization was done by the government. So it is in order to set right the administrative issue of errors in identifying the households that this was brought in. The state government has to identify the households, eligible households, and put out the list in the public domain, so that if there is an objection, they have a legal route, legal recourse to get it corrected. And importantly, NFSA do talk about nutritional support for women and children. Section 4 of the Food Security Act make it the central government's responsibility to provide a free meal through local Anganwadi childcare centers. So Anganwadi centers needs to ensure free meal to the children, and it comes from central government's funding. And also maternity benefit of at least rupees 6,000 for pregnant and lactating mothers. So that's again, so all pregnant and lactating mother get nutritional support plus rupees 6,000 rupees for meeting their expenses. And further, when you read section 5 of NFSA, it talks about food entitlements for children. So from 6 months to 14 years, the children are entitled to food security. It is through Anganwadi system, and it's through free midday meal for the school-going kids. And then there is a provision that talks about food security allowance, which the state government has the power to distribute. Then it also talks about grievance redressal mechanism and penalty. So every state government has the responsibility to set up or appoint grievance redressal officers and constitute a state food commission for the purpose of monitoring and reviewing the implementation of the act. So this act ensures a bundle of rights, and also ensures that people have a mechanism to approach, or a statutory authority to approach, in case there are grievances. So that makes this act more teethful. Yeah, there are other provisions which are important to look at, but for the purpose of our understanding, these are the important rights that we need to keep in mind. However, though it talks about uniform access to food grains, it talks about reduced rates of food grains, it talks about the right of children and mothers in relation to food security, nutritional security, there are certain criticisms against this enactment. Especially, it is in the count of uh, certain uh, non-focus or non-emphasis by the drafters, by the legislative drafters on agrarian production. Especially the Right to Food campaign, which actually came forward filing PUC petition and supported framing of the enactment. Their major contention was this food security law doesn't really promote agrarian production. It doesn't chart out a mechanism for local procurement of food grains, and it doesn't talk about local storage facilities for food grains. So in a way, it is very these points are very important to look at. I will come back to it a little later. So as it stands now we have National Food Security Act to deal with the issue of food security in the country. However, it is very important to mark that unless we give adequate importance to agriculture production, local procurement and distribution at local level, this law has no teeth. For agriculture production, food sovereignty that involves sustainable food production becomes so important. It is so important to facilitate food production through subsidies and assistance mechanism to farmers. Efficient procurement in the case of food production becomes essential as these are perishable products and reach at the needy within the time period. Procurement is also very important because it should be balanced so that it doesn't result in loss to the producers. And lastly, it is also important to revive appropriate structures of distribution to reach food to the deserved hands. So farmer being the first producer or first link in the production chain, it's so important that their rights are also ensured while we emphasize on the right to food as part of constitutional right. So when we talk about right to food as a constitutional right, we should keep in mind that right to food doesn't happen automatically. It has to happen. It has to be implemented with coordination of multi stakeholders, cooperation and participation. So farmers' interests are involved, consumers' interests are involved, states' interests are involved, intermediaries' interests are involved, and there is also overall accountability and responsibility on the state to ensure that the food is available, food is accessible, food is affordable to the citizens of the country. Right to food being a fundamental right, now it is matter of immediate obligation of the state to ensure that food reaches everyone. So, in my opinion, in order to ensure food security, you cannot merely concentrate on food production. You have to also focus on, you cannot merely focus on food distribution. You have to also focus on food production. So both food production and food distribution ensures food security in the country. So one of the important, I think, if ever the National Food Security Act needs to be amended or made more meaningful, it has to also look at efficient strategies for food production, food procurement, and food distribution at the local levels. There has to be a bottom-up approach rather than approach from the up. I would stop here and then look forward to your interaction to make it more interactive. Thank you very much.
What a wonderful session on food security in India by our ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am. It was very enlightening and informative session. Now I would like you to take the session towards the question and answer round. So student, you can ask the questions now. Yes, students. Yes, ma'am. Here's the first question
Hmm.
from Navya. Does food security include anything about the wastage of food?
So legally, if you look at the statute in legal language, because we when we talk about law relating to food security, we don't see anything about wastage of food in legal language. But when you look at ethically,
Yes, madam.
food security is also an ethical concern, right? So, as an ethical issue, we all have the responsibility not to waste food because there are many who are who requires food, who die out of hunger and starvation, especially the marginalized population, the Dalits and tribals, fisher folk, uh, forest dwellers. There are many who are facing or who are fighting poverty, starvation on daily basis. So ethically, we are all accountable not to waste food. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. The second question is you already answered the second question. The question is does it punishable under any law? Madam has wonderfully answered the question already. It is by Pratha, madam. Now, madam, it is from the Piyush. He says he wrote a question. We are having so
Let me
much.
just clarify if I can,
Yes, madam.
since you asked this punishable question.
Yes, madam.
Uh, it's not punishable in the sense, if you look at the statutes language or anywhere in the other statutes as well, ensuring food security, not ensuring food security is not punishable. But a citizen or a person who suffers because of lack of compliance by the state, or if the executive is not functioning properly, if the public authorities are not functioning properly, then definitely the public, the citizen of the country, has a legal recourse through forms of law. So basically, if the state violates the food distribution, food production, food security is responsibility of the state. So if the state derails in its responsibility, then the citizen of country can approach forms of law like courts and then get the remedy under the writ provisions.
Yes, ma'am. We are moving toward our next question by Piyush. He writed, we are having so much area under agriculture and cultivation. Is still India having a food problem? Why?
Yeah, it's a political economy question. We need to understand this question in a very larger canvas.
Yes, ma'am.
When we talk about cultivation or agrarian production, what is the strength of the population which is involved in agrarian production? If you look at the records, yearly it was 65% of the country's population engaged in agrarian production. Now it is reduced to 55%. And amongst this 55%, the majority are small and marginal farmers. So the majority of farming population are small and marginal farmers. They have very little land to produce, and the being being the farmers, small farmers, they are always at the risk of um, not getting adequate profits, and always at the risk of facing loss in farm production. You often come across the news about farmer suicides in different parts of the country. So, one of the reasons for increasing farming suicide, if you look at NCRB data, National Crimes Records Bureau's data, the majority of suicides in India is by the farmers. So, why is it happening? The farmers commit suicide because of not that they don't have entertainment in life. It's just because that they kind of amass a lot of debts because of the cost involved in cultivation. The cultivation costs are really high. They need to buy seeds. They do save seeds for sowing, but in order to have good harvest, they have to sometimes buy high yield varieties, so that incur cost. They have to buy chemicals, fertilizers, that also incur cost. They need labor to work on farms, that incur cost. And ultimately, when the production happens, when the harvest happens, it's not necessary that they get the turnover that they ask for. So the minimum support price, which was there earlier, may be low, then they face a loss there. And the other additional natural calamities, the climatic change, the climate conditions do affect them prejudicially. So all of these are reasons which affects farmers' life very directly. So when we talk about agrarian production or agrarian profit making out of agrarian production, it doesn't come as it is. It involves a lot of costs, and there has to be support mechanism. There has to be welfare schemes available from the state in order to make this process profiteering or balanced at least. As I mentioned again and again, unless you have a assisting mechanism for the farmers, the production won't happen. If the production don't happen at the local level, regional level, then the food grains won't come to the fora, the public domain. If you don't have availability of food grains, you will face a food scarcity. And if you face a food scarcity, the inflation would happen. The cost of food grains go up, then there will be inflation. If the inflation happens, the result is those who cannot afford the inflation would die out of starvation. And what happens to the country is the country has to depend on import of food, which our country has done in the initial years after independence. So there are a lot of things that we have to read together when we discuss this topic of food security. So though we say that there are a lot of land in agriculture production, a lot of land in India is under farming, it's not necessary that all farms give enough results, enough harvest always to the farmers. Their lives are highly volatile. Their returns are highly volatile.
Yes, ma'am. The next question is from Shubham Kumar. Ma'am, as the food stock stored by the government, which is the buffer stock gets spoiled, isn't it the wastage of food?
Very good question.
Yes, ma'am.
So when you look at buffer stock, surplus stock getting rotten in FCA godowns, Food Corporation of India godowns. This was the exact reason that pushed PUCL to file the case before the Supreme Court. So distribution of food grains becomes so important. So look at the contradiction here. There are rotten grains in the Food Corporation of India godowns, and people dying out of starvation on the other side. So if you look at the coin, the one side is about surplus stocks lying rotten, eaten by rats. The other side is people dying out of hunger and starvation. So what happens here is there's no efficient mechanism, administrative mechanism to distribute food. So that's where India fails. It's not that we don't have production. India became, if you look at the history, political economy of food production in India, when India became independent, we had no adequate production, food production. So we relied in their go down, but there is no appropriate mechanism to distribute food. So that's where this failure of the system happens. failure of the administrative system happens. So it's so important that wastage of food don't occur, especially in state garages, state godowns. It should. That I think that's exactly the Supreme Court also mentioned. If the state fails to distribute the food grains amassed in godowns, the state has to pay for damages. So yeah, state becomes responsible. State has to pay damages to the uh, to the needy, to the people who die out of starvation.
So we are moving to our next question. Madam, school students are asking continuously so many questions, and out of which I have to pick. So, madam, there is Harpreet Bedi. He's asking, what about food adulteration companies are doing it so often? Aren't these a strengthening law which could stop them? In a FICCI survey of 15 honey bottles of different companies, only two honey company passed the safety test.
Yeah. So food adulteration is totally different issue. It's about you are adulterating food, yeah, right? That's a criminal activity. So adulteration of food is to damage the physiological conditions, if at all. If adulteration affects human body, it becomes a criminal act. So it's a completely different issue. Food security largely focus on security of the food. Security of the food is all about production and distribution of food. And in the distribution of food, we know that there are private companies, multinational companies doing the food products business, and they engage in adulteration activities. And according to law, we have this Food Adulteration Act, and any adulteration which affects the physiological conditions of humans amount to criminal act.
Yes, madam. Madam, next is very highly debatable topic today's in the today's year. Madam, it is a question of Kusharj Baveja. Good afternoon, ma'am. I have a question that, as you mentioned in the initial phase regarding India's ranking on the global level, so don't you think you must not just the government but also the companies who show some kind of improper advertisements regarding that if you drink a particular substance, you will see some specific outcome. So isn't it a kind of malnutrition or adulteration is sugar coated manner?
Yeah, so again, it comes to so this adulteration issue or disparagement through advertisements, all of these are very different issue, disconnected from food security. Food adulteration is a altogether a different act. The scope of food adulteration, the understanding of food adulteration is very different from what food security is. As I mentioned once, it's a general answer again. So when we talk about food adulteration or disparaging through advertisement, etc., there is legal recourse available already under criminal provisions. Even under IPC, we have provisions. And Food Adulteration Act do talk about adulteration-related activities and punishment in the case of adulteration beyond a level. And so there is all set of criminal regime that is available in such cases. Misleading the people, giving misinformation. For example, I think we have come across certain celebrities being asked to pay damages for being part of advertisements, which are not realistic in any manner. So, yeah, misleading the public, misleading the consumers, definitely you get damages under the Consumer Forum.
Ma'am, we have so many questions, but due to the shortage of time, I just My thoughts, madam. Student was very curious and they really liked your session, madam. They are asking so many questions. So, but due to the shortage of time, we would like to end the session, ma'am. So, at the end, you want to say something to the students. So, please, ma'am.
Yeah, my basically the suggestion is to follow every debate that comes in, especially around food security. We kind of we always hear from newspapers, TV debates about food security. So listen to all of it. Read laws, read history of the country, and then you should have your own valuation, your own opinion about, especially about these integral issues. Because if you have no food, you cannot exist. So it's a very integral issue to your existence. So be open, be attentive. Thank you.
So, thank you so much, madam. So,
So,
thank you
thank you.
everyone for kindly attending the session. So, ma'am.
Um, I would like to thank Dr. Sophy. She has spared her valuable time to us. Thank you, ma'am. It was a very wonderful session. It was a very great session. I think so, including faculty and student has benefit from this very interactive session. Thank you very much. Thank you,
Yes.
sir.
Thank you,
Yes,
Kalpana, for
madam.
coordinating it. Thank you for
Thank
the
you so much,
opportunity.
madam.
Thank you. So I am ending the event. Okay.
Yes, madam.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.